Hi, everybody. I'm Kat Margulis, and I'm the host of The Power Story. And as a longtime journalist, author, and book coach, I see story everywhere I go. But in recent years, I've had the chance to see how story can transform lives and businesses. And that's really what I want to explore with you through this series and with my guests is how you can create the life, the business, and the legacy of your dreams with story. And so I am so excited to have with me today Annette Simmons. And Annette is the author of The Story Factor: Inspiration, Influence, and Persuasion Through the Art of Storytelling, as well as Whoever Tells the Best Story Wins. Her clients have included NASA, Microsoft, Meta, PricewaterhouseCoopers, businesses large and small, nonprofits, and governments. Welcome, Annette. Thank you for being part of The Power Story.
This is so much fun. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So you have a really cool background, and it spans international business, psychology, and leadership. How has the work that you've done influenced the conclusions you've come to about the power of storytelling? Like basically, what have you learned that made you rethink the art and influence of storytelling?
Well, I really appreciate that's a good question because I come from storytelling in a different way than I think a lot of people have been trained up. You know, the script writing and that sort of stuff. That's a particular form of story. But what happened for me is I lived in Australia during all my 20s. So in addition to ensuring that I'm the only person you'll ever meet that'll say y'all and schedule in the same sentence, it was an expansive immersion in cultural differences. So I'm a girl from Shreveport, Louisiana. And I hit there the ugly American. I mean, it wasn't, it just was. And the Australians took it upon them to beat it out of me. That there are different cultures and different ways to look at things. And so it's a great experience. Now, I had started studying psychology when I was 13 years old because I'm a freak. And I think it was like, how do I get to be popular, you know? But I learned transactional analysis, rational emotive therapy. My dad taught me transcendental meditation. And so, anyway, when I hit Australia, I had this undergraduate in marketing. So I had learned excellent business school education. So I had really learned plan your work your plan sort of approach to everything. And when I went to work with groups, I worked for Ericsson and J. Walter Thompson. It was like this group couldn't even decide what to have on a pizza together. How are we going to make, decisions about campaigns in this creative sort of environment where there's really no right wrong? And so I decided to go back to graduate school and study group process. So my graduate degree was in adult education and psychology, because those are the areas that influence whether we actually speak to each other as a group or we fight amongst ourselves. And so the first book I ever wrote after I did that degree was called Territorial Games, because silos drove me nuts. Little did I know it would get worse, but certainly it was like, and the thing is that if I had asked objective questions, what happens is that people would respond in metaphor. So what happened? Well, the guy stabbed me in the back. And I say, well, actually, so there's a lot of wisdom in the metaphor, but we have to take that metaphor and we have to turn it into something we can really understand and examine. And so I'd ask them to tell me stories. And so the guy would tell the story about, well, I was in this meeting and I had paid attention while he was presenting, and then I stood up to present, and all of a sudden he's like, looking at his phone, and that's a territorial game. That's a message that can have a profound impact on a group's ability to work together, and yet it's such a tiny little thing. And so I began to look at those tiny little things that have an exponential impact. And so after I wrote Territorial Games, I thought, well, if we name these games intimidation, strategic noncompliance, they'll stop doing it. I was young. So then I wrote A Safe Place for Dangerous Truth, and that's when I first got into story. See, when I was in graduate school, I went to the National Storytelling Festival at the same time, and I realized adult education is often the antecedents and the people who've written about it are about social movement, not
Mm.
training and development. Okay, and so this is about transformational stuff. And after I had studied that, I'm sitting in a tent in Jonesboro, Tennessee, listening to folklorists and traditional tellers, and I'm like, oh, this is my field work. And so when I started studying story, I studied from the folklorist. And it caused me to come to the realization that there's that in ancient times, storytelling has evolved as an evolutionary tool to deal with subjective issues that can't be answered with objective issues. So, instance, you look at the ancient, oldest institutions in the world, um, religion, and you got two groups. You got your dogma dudes, which is
Mhm.
A, B, C, D, and then you got your mystics, which they're the storytellers. And so, one example from Jewish and Christian literature is the law can be inhumane at times. If you the letter of the law, so the objective world, right, wrong, but in the subjective world, it's both and.
Mm.
And so, for instance, the Jewish lawmakers tried to corner Jesus and said, "Isn't it against the law to heal on the Sabbath? Because it is against the law of God to work on the Sabbath." Well, the Jewish tradition already has a formula for dealing with the when laws get inhumane, and that is
Mhm.
story. And so Jesus told an old Jewish midrash story that if your ox falls in a well on the Sabbath, you wouldn't leave it there to die because then you cause your children to starve. And so what happens with story in the ancient form is that it teaches us how to handle paradox. It
Mm.
teaches us how to be humane even though our rational, answers might be, to leave someone to drown because we have to save ourselves, and yet our humanity depends on
Mm.
mercy and forgiveness, and I call those big T truths. And so I started mining story for big T truths more than well, I wrote about how you can find a story to meet an objective. So I just you see my experience t-shirt. I just got back from a client. I love UX people. And so one of the things that we've done is we've taken storytelling to the point where we define what it is. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but that doesn't necessarily lead you to the mystery of what story can do for us and how story can keep us human. And so I just love hanging out with user experience people because they get that. And so my approach to story is to look at a significant emotional experience. And so I'm following the emotion.
Mm.
And I believe that all humans, we have probably a finite number of universal experiences. So we have both screwed up.
Mhm.
We have all been forgiven when we didn't even deserve it. We have all fallen in love and made a fool of ourselves. And if I talk about my mother, you start to think about your mother. And we have all been dumped. And frankly, if you haven't been dumped, nobody wants to hear about it. So these are the universal human experiences where the wisdom is. And so I use these stories to then migrate over to the six kinds of stories that I developed specifically because my job was to get groups past impasse. And so
Wow.
when I was facilitating dialogue, when I came in, it was ugly. It was ugly a lot of the time. So what I would do is I would use storytelling as a facilitator tool. So that's the first time I used it because I'd heard these stories back at Jonesboro. And so I would tell a story that profiled that person who just won't show up. And I'm not talking about anybody in the group, but the people who know themselves will self regulate for a little bit after I do that. And so I could change behaviors just by telling these stories. And in a way, it's a teaching story. It's a kind of a vision story about how we're going to have this dialogue and we're all going to be, because you can have ground rules, but they don't change behavior. What
Yeah.
I found is story actually changed behavior. So that's kind of how I came into the storytelling. And then I could see all sorts of different uses for it. And so my approach to storytelling is the idea that it's a significant emotional experience. And then we narrate it in a way with enough sensory detail that it feels real both to the teller, because I think while you're telling a story, you've got to be there. If you're
Mhm.
talking about a time when you were skiing, you have to feel cold, you need to feel the whether the snow is slushy or, and when you do, your story becomes so much more realistic to those people who you're telling to, because you may not mention all those details that you're imagining in your brain, but it is the imagination where the magic is. And
Mm.
so we use our imagination to find the stories instead of, here's the goal. I want them to conclude this. So I'm going to back engineer a story that leads them to the conclusion. While one of the principles I teach is story is developmental, you take someone through an experience so they come to the same conclusions you've come to. Pardon me, but that's because you go back to your own personal experience that
Mm.
caused you to go on that track. And so you're using yourself as the subject matter. And when I ask people to tell the six stories, these are designed specifically because that's how I got groups to talk to each other.
Wow.
People want to know who you are, and they think they know who you are, and you think you know who you are, but it's a different story. So a lot of times what we have to do is we have to retell the who I am, why I'm here story,
Mm.
to reorient the context. Because
Okay.
you're about to make a presentation, everybody in the room might be, oh God, they're going to have one more damn thing I have to do all day. So I need to change that context. And so
Yeah.
I tell people a story about where I come from, and we establish a connection first, and then once we have that broadband of connection, then I can send my information across this link between us.
Mm.
So who I am, why I'm here, vision story. And so my favorite vision story right now is when I'm teaching people how to make presentations. I've learned that the story they tell themselves about their audience is sometimes the problem. I don't know how to turn that off. Sorry.
Ah.
And so I asked them to tell a different story about their audience. And so my favorite one right now is, just imagine you're training some puppies. And they look at me like, you've got to be kidding. I was like, well, you think about it, you don't blame a puppy when the puppy's not paying attention to you. No,
Mm.
you have to have treats. And so the stories are the treats that get people to come in and to connect with you on a human level, and then we can talk about what it is, and it changes the atmosphere. I
Yeah.
no longer am afraid of my audience and thinking I have to be perfect. Now I'm ready to play with my audience, and so I can use more of a pull strategy instead of a push strategy. So that's a vision story. Value and action story, we have so many values. I remember back in the days we used to laminate the six values on a card, like that was going to do something. But now, when I teach people value and action stories, you need to, if you want to say that people need to act with integrity, you need to tell a story about what that means. Because
Mm.
integrity in some situations is keeping your mouth shut, and in some situations it's speaking up.
Mm.
And so when we share stories about what integrity means, then we actually change behavior. And I also talk about the teaching story, which is just a role model for somebody so that they don't have to make the mistakes you made. And
Mhm.
then the I know what you're thinking story, which is my favorite. When I walk into a room full of, a lot of white males that are like, who's this person going to touchy feely stuff? One of the things I do is I say, okay, we now all need to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And it breaks the ice because I know what they're thinking. And I've gone to their worst fear and I'm like, we're not doing that. Trust me. I understand action plans.
Yeah.
So those are the six stories.
Love it. Oh my gosh. Thank you for that download. I love it. So much there. What I really also really love is how you talk about um telling yourself a different story about your audience. Like, or yeah, just like revisiting the story you're telling yourself. Notice the story you're telling yourself about your audience.
I have to do it
That's so cool.
I have to do it over and over and over again. It's like, these are lessons that we don't learn and then lock in, like patience.
Yes.
If without storytelling, I'm not sure I'd be up to date on what patience means. But for me, patience is telling myself a different story about what's going on. And that's
Yeah.
the same thing you're doing with your audience, is you're recontextualizing. So one of the things I love about story is that it changes the context. And that changes then not just the content, but the reciprocal back and forth. So when I teach how to find a story, I teach story as a collaborative process. If you don't have a listener who can listen your creative intelligence out of you, you can't practice a story in a mirror
Mm,
because it's that's not what a story is. The story is co-created. If
mm.
what's in my imagination is now also in your imagination, then that's a story. And so
Wow.
I can't practice that without having another human being with an imagination, and I can see in their eyes what parts of the story work and what parts don't. And so I
Yeah.
teach storytelling as a collaborative process. So like yesterday with this group of 75 user experience people, now they know how to be each other's coaches. And so that's for me the real development of storytelling, and it points back to the ancient wisdom that stories have been recording that can't be recorded
Mm.
in law. The ancient wisdom that we need right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Incredible. Incredible. I love what you said about stories being we think about stories that it's content. It's context.
Context first,
And
context first, and then
yes,
then you have new content.
yes.
Just think about, these, these geniuses with two PhDs and all that sort of stuff. They're looking at their presentation, and there's just a PowerPoint slide after PowerPoint slide after, and I just pull it all away from them. I'm like, so what treat are you going to give to your audience?
I love it.
And it changes what they think the content is. So it's,
Yeah.
yeah, I have such a good time with storytelling.
Oh my gosh, I bet. Um, so cool. You kind of answered my next question, so I'm gonna skip along here. Um, well, let's dig in. I mean, you're kind of talking about what's happening, but yeah. So your most recent book, I believe, is Drinking from a Different Well.
Yeah, that was so my methodology for research is storytelling. I gather stories.
Yes.
Um, and so I've noticed gender differences over the years, but we don't have permission to talk about it. And so
Mm,
I thought, you know what? I'm 61 years old. I can talk about whatever I want to. So I ask women to tell me a story of a time when they were powerful, and I ask men to tell me a story of a time when they were powerful. And women and men very much tell the same story, which is basically having control over a situation.
mm,
But women's stories, like 50% of them, is the time when they shared power, which kind of undermines this whole power over thing.
mm.
Sharing power means that you give power away, or you share it with somebody. And so that makes us feel powerful. So when we go into a situation where a kid doesn't have any other support other than what we're able to provide, and we put them in a better situation where they can thrive, doesn't necessarily turn into some sort of quantitative achievement, but it feels like an achievement. And
Mhm.
so for one of the things I discovered is that, and this comes from some of the research about why nurses are leaving, because we have these objective, highly structured
Mm.
systems. And a lot of the nurses are leaving because of what they call moral distress. I
Yeah.
can no longer do the right thing. I can't slow down when I need to slow down. I can't speed up when I need to speed up. And so one of the things that I've learned through writing this book about women in power is that empathy is actually deviation from consistency. And so we
Wow.
have valued consistency as if that defines quality. But the
Mhm.
truth is, when I take time out to take extra special care for this one person and spend some of my time, I contribute, my power, if you will, to help
Mhm.
that person thrive. That is an inconsistency. And that's where I really believe morals instead of rules,
Mhm.
the ancient repository of morals and storytelling are almost always how to balance a paradox.
Mm.
So, for instance, we've got clients coming up with. Have you heard 10x yet?
I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, that's like the vision for a lot of people. They want to scale 10 times the size, and I don't know whether it's 10 years or whatever, but 10x is a real goal, and
Okay.
that's an objective goal. But I
Mhm.
remind them of the 3,000-year-old story of King Midas, and King Midas wanted everything he touched to turn to gold. But then when his little 3-year-old daughter ran up to him and he went to pick her up, he turned his precious daughter into a cold, dead statue of gold. And so we need to remember that we want to grow, but we also want to keep the humanity and the
Mhm.
connections. And so balancing that paradox, I've never found anything better than storytelling to help
Wow.
people. And it's out there where the buses don't run, you know.
Yeah.
It's out there where the engineers don't like to go. But if we're going to create humane, positive experiences for people, we have all the resources in the world. All we need to do is go look at those ancient stories and figure out how they're handling paradox and how we can transfer to what we're doing now.
So cool. Yeah, you whisked me away.
I get excited.
I want to. I'm having an internal struggle right now where I want to go somewhere. I'm like, I don't know if we need to go there, Kat.
Okay.
Um, but with what's happening, buzzwords and what the hashtags, and I went to my son's high school open house yesterday, and I'm seeing a curation of story. And I spoke with somebody earlier in this series who was like, let's just blow open the doors, let all stories be available. Like, how how do you feel we move through this time of, well, somebody even mentioned also like the right story, like this conversation that we're having right now around stories. It's
Yeah.
super
Yeah. I don't.
political right now.
That's and so the right story. There's an economist called Amartya Sen. He won the Nobel Prize because in the 1950s, Arrow, some guy named Arrow, proved that equality is mathematically impossible. And so everybody's like, "Oh, well." But Amartya Sen won the Nobel Prize, going, yeah, between where we are right now and this supposedly impossible thing, there's an embarrassment of riches that we could be looking at. And so the resource is the stories.
Mm.
And so when we are trying to solve a paradox, when those people who want to divide us, all they have to do is find a paradox, and
Mm.
they can create what's called contrived hatred.
Mm.
So in our political situation right now, we've got, a cluster of people that say that freedom is the most important thing. Don't take my freedom away. We have a cluster of people who say safety is very important. We need safety nets. And the divisiveness has caused us to take a paradox and stand in two different ivory towers where the answers are actually here in the middle,
Mm.
because the paradox of safety and freedom is something that you don't solve once and for all. It's
Mhm.
something that you increase the safety, and then, oh, you need to increase some more freedom, and then you increase. So it's this infinity back and forth.
Mm.
And so objective thinking thinks there's one perfect answer, but
Mhm.
story allows us to see that both answers are
Mhm.
right, and
Mhm.
that we have to go back and forth between.
Mhm.
It's sad right now because people who are in the middle, who are, wanting, they call them centrist, which has
Yeah.
gotten to be a bad word.
Mhm.
That's actually where the solutions are.
Mhm.
Um, and so I worry about, with this political environment, that people are using story to emphasize one side of a paradox
Mhm.
without thinking there's any responsibility. And then that turns a paradox into a conflict.
Yeah.
And so I'm teaching people that when we have these paradoxes, safety, freedom is something that occurs in everything we do.
Mhm.
That instead of fighting it out in an adversarial way, the idea is to figure out a way to toggle back and forth.
Yeah.
And there's answers there.
Yeah.
They will not deliver the clarity you think you want, but they will deliver sanity. And that's even better.
I love that. I love that answer. Thank you. Um, how can change makers, and I know you're touching it, but we'll have a question that just focus on this. How can change makers use story to create change, and what's important for them to know from a storytelling standpoint?
Well, my methodology is if I think I want to change something, I have to go in and I have to learn these people's stories, what exists. Because a lot of times you're coming in from the outside, kind of like the great white hunter, going in and we think we know what's going on because we have numbers that tell us what's going on. But the first thing I do is I gather stories,
Mm,
and I'm expecting there to be at least 3 to 5 legitimate points of view about what should happen next. And so what I do is then I filter what it is I think needs to change. And this is very much in the UX. So we immerse ourselves. So I don't know if you're familiar with the steps, but discovery, guidelines, prototype, and iteration is the process for UX, and that's what I use for storytelling. So discovery is the place I start as a change agent, and I will negotiate with whoever told me the change I need to make that it's going to change. That's why the design occurred, because software designers knew that by a year from now everything's going to change. And so what you do is you set yourself up for it. So
ah,
gather these stories, take what it is you think needs to happen, and then allow them to collaborate so that you invent a new story. You may have had your original one. You invent a new story that's a function of all those points of view.
wow.
And once it's a function of all those points of view, it's going to feel fair to more people because there are at least seven different definitions of fair.
Yeah.
And so if your story is that fair means that, we all share equally, and my story is fair that means that whoever brings in the rain, who's the rainmaker, gets the most, then we have to moderate.
Mm,
Otherwise, I'm going to go by my definition. I'm going to treat you in a way that feels unfair.
mhm,
And I think today, if we're looking at any change, we need to understand the feelings of fairness, because we no longer can manufacture obedience. What we
mm,
have to do is we have to create a situation that feels meaningful. And so that's what I would do is, and then I would include all those people as evangelists, the ones that helped us come up with this new story about change, and let them, help design.
yeah.
There's an inverse relationship between control and participation. And if you come in as a change agent and you're trying to control everything, you just squash everybody's participation down to nothing. They finally go to, there's 4 group escape strategies, and one of them is dependence. And dependence is just tell me what to do. And you've missed out on all the creative intelligence that that person has to give when they decide, okay, I'll be obedient. And
Yeah.
then, of course, it turns to malicious obedience. But
Mhm. Oh my God. Wow. Yeah, just blew the roof off my head. So I'm going to end it there because I just feel like there's so much there for anybody to explore and how they can emulate that in their life. A lot for me to explore personally. So yeah, thank you for all that golden. Oh, wait, Annette, before we go, do you have anything else you'd like to share?
Um, I feel like you've done a great job. I've been excited the whole time that we've been on Zoom together, and so hopefully that I do want people to know that you can reach me at my email right now is down God help me. I've had a website for like 25 years and it's just this old building that's falling apart. I'm going to have to replace it. So if in the interim, if people want to get in touch with me, use my Gmail account, Annette GPC at Gmail. And I am always open to questions because every question I get to learn something new. And so feel free to get in touch with me. And I probably, I'd be happy to Zoom if somebody really wanted to do that because it's just always a learning experience for me.
Oh, incredible, Annette. Well, thank you for that super generous offer. There will be links in the speaker show notes and all of that as well. Make sure you guys get that. Look for a Power Story workshop on the 24th and more amazing interviews on the way. Annette, I have no words. I have no words. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you soon. Bye.